Thank you so much. I'm really chuffed to be here, to be honest. And I'm just going to start my presentation. Hopefully, this is going to work. And sharing now and just checking. Is it working? Yes, it's working. Hurrah. So hello, everybody. And thank you for taking some time to listen to me and to watch if you're watching. I was asked to talk about my experiences as an author and how they, for me, this is how they're tied in with me being a midwife. So the title is In Other Words, because there are always other words. And I'm Alys Einion, and I've been writing since I was about this big. Since I was 7, I wanted to be a novelist. But coming to midwifery was not necessarily my first choice of career. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that because stories have always fascinated me. Stories have always been the thing that drew me in, that helped me understand life. I'd learned a lot from stories. Some of my favorite books taught me more about the world and life than in fiction than I'd ever seen in fact. And I've always believed the stories are the fundamental part of who we are and how we live and how we express ourselves. And so I was always driven with this desire to understand, to experience stories, and also to write and share them. And I've always felt that there's things I want to say, and there's things that I want to hear from other people as well. So this idea that we're all tellers of tales has really underpinned my entire midwifery career and all of the creation, the writing, the creative thought that has gone alongside it. And I do feel that quite often we forget just how valuable it is to read outside of facts. And one other thing is that midwives are very much embedded in a medical system which is quite grounded in the age of enlightenment, and this idea of us being reasoning, that the human being is, the highest way of thinking is through reason. And I don't actually think that's necessarily the case, because we are holistic midwives. We're human beings. We're beings. And in that we have feelings, and it's feelings that give meaning to our words and our experiences. And so I do feel that as a midwife, I evolved from this understanding of the power of stories. So I'm going to start with my story, and I'm going to be brief. But in the beginning, I was not going to be a midwife. I was going to be a writer. And then something happened to me. I had a most amazing birth experience. Typical of many midwives, I had a brilliant midwife with my first pregnancy. She was utterly amazing. And at the point where I was birthing my first child, I looked in her eyes and I knew that that was what I wanted to do with my life. That was what was going to give my life true meaning. But sadly, my first child died. And this was the beginning of that story. And it's been the same story ever since. From that moment, that inciting moment, my life changed and I became a midwife. But I never forgot my love of stories and also my love of the written word. So I love this picture of me. I look so young. I took the usual route that you did at the time. I went through nursing first, and then went to London to do one of the very first degrees in midwifery that you could do alongside midwifery registration. And I absolutely loved it. I knew I was in the right place. But through all of it, I never forgot my love of words and of storytelling. I qualified, and luckily, I also had another pregnancy, which this time did not result in a tragic ending. So my son lived. And I started my first jobs, as we all do, in midwifery. And I discovered, as I was becoming the midwife I'd always wanted to be, that much of what I did linked to this idea of creativity, to the words, to the stories we tell. The way we learn and the way we teach, it's all about stories. A handover at the beginning of a shift, it's a story. We tell a narrative. And I also discovered that there was a difference in the way that we tell stories compared to the way other colleagues, particularly medical colleagues, but other colleagues might tell stories, because we tended to put the human more central in our stories. But our stories, our midwife stories, were the ones that weren't necessarily front and center. Throughout my clinical work, I was juggling motherhood and midwifery, which was a challenge. And I also did 2 master's degrees. I did one in professional development, which was for my career, and which was really, really useful. And I rely on that knowledge all the time. I have done throughout my career. But I took another step, and that was to do a master's in creative writing because I wanted to follow that passion. I've always written stories. I've tried writing novels before, way before this. And I invested in myself. And I hope that resonates with you, that it was the first time I'd given myself permission to actually invest in something that was not necessarily career focused, but was for my own pleasure and my own development. And it was the right decision. And from that, I was able to develop my skills and my understanding. I moved into academia and started teaching midwifery. And as you can see here, we can see a student waiting for feedback on their essay. I love teaching, and I discovered that teaching is all about telling stories. So maybe you've heard of the concept of the wise story or the wisdom story. Much of what we do, we actually share through those stories, those wisdom stories. We give case examples, we discuss our experiences. And I learned through all of it, I learned that when I tell a story, students listen, they engage much more than when I'm just giving bare facts, because the feelings give more meaning to the words. And through all my experiences, I've worked in some amazing places with some amazing women and colleagues, and also some amazing students. And it's those stories that have inspired me throughout. So I met another midwife when I was working clinically who was writing fiction. And I really believed myself that I could potentially do that. So I decided to do my PhD. Now, my PhD is actually in women's writing. And it was very, very illuminating. So I studied women's fiction, women's narratives. I studied factual narratives, women's life writing, and it totally changed my world. It was from that I got the confidence to then be sending out books to get published. So all through my career, and I want you to think about this, we see midwifery as we're in clinical and you might follow this path, that midwifery is a profession with so many possibilities. You can publish, you can write academically, you can write opinions, you can write anything you want to write. You can come on a wonderful program like this and talk about what you do, who you are, your experiences, your knowledge, your insight. There's always the scope. For me, I have loved writing all the way through my career, and I have loved the scope that I've had to express myself. So I've published 4 books, 2 of which were co-written or edited, and 2 of which are novels that I wrote myself and published. And it has changed the way I see things, because my work always focuses on the voices of women. On the voices of women, whether they're midwives or mothers, on the voices of childbearing people. That's where my focus has been. And it has driven me through everything that I do. All I can see is this theme of what are the stories? Where are the stories from? And if you take anything from what I'm saying today, one of the things I want you to take is that you can do this too. You can do this. You can tell your stories. You can write in whatever form it is. And I do believe that everything has a narrative shape. Everything is shaped like a story. Even a journal article has its own story. So during my career, what I ended up seeing and researching much more was this idea of stories. I researched birth stories presented in the media. So the reality TV shows like The Midwives, which was an old BBC program on midwives, or One Born Every Minute, which helped me to understand the way that we talk about birth, midwifery, motherhood, and what kinds of stories shape that. I also looked at student midwife stories. And what you can see in this picture is student midwife learning journals from one of my places of employment, where we looked at the learning journals that the students kept throughout their 3 years, which did form part of their clinical assessment. And it taught me an awful lot about the experience of student midwives so that we could make that better. So there's so much power and value in a good story. What we often forget, though, is that the gap between creative writing and academic writing is not that big. They are both acts of creation, and they come from one thing, which is your voice, your words, your experience. And I do believe that if more midwives and student midwives and mothers felt confident to share and express their stories, we would be changing and evolving the landscape of midwifery and maternity care even more rapidly than we already are. The other thing that I was surprised at, because I was never, you might be surprised to hear this, but I was never that fond of public speaking. I love teaching. Public speaking came harder, but I found there's a great value and a great joy in going out there and standing up for what matters to you and speaking about it. And I've been really lucky and had plenty of opportunities to do that, including getting to meet some famous people. Just a little picture there. But it was always a challenge because I'd think, well, why would anybody want to hear what I've got to say? And that was another lesson, because imposter syndrome is absolutely rife in midwifery academia, in nursing academia. And actually, we all have something of value to add and to contribute, but it can take quite a lot of support to enable you to feel confident to do that. One of the biggest and most valuable things that happened to me throughout this journey, alongside being able to work with such amazing students and midwives, was to then step into an editorial role as the editor-in-chief of the Practicing Midwife Journal. I had been writing quite a lot for the journal and done some editorial work with them. And this role, it just is the most exciting thing you could do. In this role, I get to see firsthand what midwives are saying, what they're writing. I get to work with midwives and birth workers and student midwives and academics of all kinds, and to actually help them to get their voices out, help them to get their words published, and help them to keep shaping the ongoing narrative that is midwifery. And this is what I want you to think about. Every single one of you, every single person out there who is involved in maternity care, in midwifery, it to any degree has something to contribute and has something to share, but we lack the confidence to do so. So when I started in the role, I thought, well, this is all about getting articles in and getting them shaped and then getting them out again. But what I discovered was that more and more, my role involves developmental editing. It's working with people and helping them to see how they can put their words onto paper or onto the screen, and how they can shape their stories so that they can be more effective and they can reach an audience. And there's such a power in that. And that's one of the things that I was not expecting, that I would end up working so closely with people. And it has reminded me that any forum in which you can express that story can be of real value. What we have in places like the Maternity Midwifery Festivals and This Hour and Matflix and in the Practicing Midwife is a community that is huge and diverse and willing and ready to listen and to read, if we only have the confidence to speak. So enough about me. What about you? What I really want to talk to you about is that through all of this, I've never stopped writing. I'm still writing. I'm still creating. I'm editing another edited collection at the moment for Demeter Press on midwives, motherhood, and mythology, which is proving to be really interesting. And I'm also writing another novel. I've never lost this passion for creation, and I think quite a lot of us, they kind of get sucked out of you as you're going through the challenges of a busy midwifery career. Your passion for creation or your energy for creation might be sucked out of you. So I'm just here to remind you that actually it's okay to give yourself permission to do the things that you want to do, and to remember that your identity is part of this whole journey. Your whole identity is a story that's a product of your entire life journey. You have a collective identity, but it's you that's writing your story, your life story. And there are things that you might want to share. Your voice is important. You are the authority on your own experiences. You are the authority on your own work, on your own life. And that voice, your voice, could be the thing that makes a difference to someone else. It could be the thing that turns the tide for someone else. It might be something that you say or write would enable someone to enter midwifery or to stay in midwifery. Or it might be that a mother feels better about her birth experience because of what you've said. Or that a student feels motivated because of what you've written. So come back to your voice and remember that you have things to say, and that regardless of how the world seems to think that there's a divide between science and fiction, there actually isn't, because the best stories are the ones based in fact, even when we extrapolate to make a fiction story. It's your story. This is what I've learned throughout my whole career after 25 years of doing this. It's your story. And if it's your story, you've got the power to make choices, to make decisions, and to make it a good one. So think about it. There's nothing more exciting to me than looking at somebody's story and realizing that they are speaking and expressing themselves in a way that I can learn from, in something that adds to and changes my world. To take a look at your stories, and don't be afraid to write and speak them in a way that reinforces a positive self-image for yourself and for other people. Because we should value ourselves, we should value our learning, and we should show our respect for others through the words that we share. I've learned that the language we use in midwifery and the words we share very much show and demonstrate how we, as a profession, integrate our values into our identities, and how we act as role models for others. And that can happen through any medium. Respecting ourselves is the first step to respecting others. So that means actually valuing what you have to say and knowing that it's worth it. You are worth it. Your words are worth it. I love writing. I love creating, but everything that I write or create, fiction or fact, comes from that same place. And it is all a creative act. So I wanted to give you a little bit of inspiration, but also a little push to go out there and to write. So I've summarized some basic guidelines for writing, and I'm going to split it into nonfiction and fiction because they are a bit different. And I'd like you to not be afraid to think about, well, could I put something out there? You don't have to have hardcore primary research to get writing or to publish. You've got things to say, you've got opinions, you've got analysis, you've got experiences. All of these are valuable. So let's just quickly look at some of the stepping stones that could help you to get out there and to just write. First of all, if it's nonfiction, get your idea and read what is already written about it, because that can really help you to locate what you're writing in what's happening in the world. And then, absolutely key, where are you going to publish it? Pick a place where you want to publish it and check their guidelines. So if you came to the Practicing Midwife, you'd come to our website and you'd look at our author guidelines. Always download the author guidelines. And then obviously make contact with the editor. So if it's Practicing Midwife, it's me. Propose your idea and wait for some feedback. And don't be afraid of feedback. Have to be able to take feedback. It's not fun, but you have to. And then write according to the guidelines. Stick to any submission dates, please. And don't be afraid to then once you submit, to get the feedback and to act on it, because all the best writing is in editing. The other thing I'd say to you as well is also you can look for calls for papers. Lots of journals and publishers will put out calls for papers, calls for chapters, and that one of those might strike a chord with you. It might be something you're an expert on. It might be something you've got experience of. Don't be afraid to write. And also look for others who are interested in the same topic, because people can be really valuable in terms of collaboration. And when you talk to people who are interested in the same thing as you, sometimes they say, oh, let's get together and do something about that. I've had some great collaborations with people because of that. So that's your nonfiction. Fiction. I love fiction. I read a lot. You can't tell. There's like a gazillion books behind me. And the best writers do read a lot. There's an old adage in fiction, and it goes for facts as well. Write what you know. In fiction, you should write what you know and what you understand. That doesn't mean it all has to be from your own experience, but the things that you know and you understand gives you an authentic voice. Think about what you read, and then think about, if you want to write fiction and you're scared, what's the book or the story or the poem that you always wanted to read? Think about that and then write that book. That's the book you want to read, so write it. And don't be afraid to. Getting to know other writers can be really helpful as well, because they can inspire you, they can motivate you, and they can also help you to realize, When you have those dark moments when you're sitting there with your pen thinking, why am I writing this? And you've lost any confidence or you've got a big writer's block, they can get you through that and they can remind you just how valuable it is to keep going and keep telling your story because someone will want to read it. And then come back to you. As I said before, your voice matters. So find your voice. And that just means writing in whatever format you like. You need to find your writing routine. Where can you write? When can you write? What conditions help you to write? And you can look at all kinds of fiction and non-fiction writers who will tell you about the conditions they need to write. They might need to go and write in their writing shed. They might need to stand up. They might need to write on yellow paper with a particular pen. Everybody has their own approaches, but give yourself permission to be that writer and then just write. It doesn't matter if it's rubbish. It doesn't matter because the first draft is never what you publish anyway. Just keep writing and write and write and write until you've got everything down, because then you can go back and you can fix the story on editing. My first novel, Inshallah, it took me 6 years to write. It was part of my PhD and then it had to be rewritten in order to be published. And it was almost unrecognizable in many ways, the final published version from when I first started writing it. It took a lot of editing. And we all have to kill our darlings. That's what we call it in writing. You have to actually slash and burn and cut out thousands and thousands of much loved, painful words that were, practically bled onto the page. But ultimately, there's a discipline in it and it feels really good. And once you've got your story down, it's like having a child and you send it out into the world and then you have to just let it do its own thing. Any method that you choose to write is right. Just express what you want to express and enjoy it. I absolutely love it. There are two things I love to do. I love to read and I love to write. And both of them give me a complete breakaway from the world where I enter into a creative space and I can dwell there for a while. And it's like taking a holiday. It is so rejuvenating and it's so empowering. So I just want to say to you that, yes, you can write, you should write, and don't be afraid to try. So I just want to come back to this. Everyone has a story. Whether it's a story you are telling someone to teach them something, whether it's a story you're sharing with a mother to help her to feel empowered during her birthing journey, whether it's a story you're writing down and sending off to a publisher or an article you're writing, whether it's that story you tell at the end of your working day and you just offload everything onto your significant other. Your story matters, but you are in charge of it. You are in control. So let's make it a good one. So that's me. I'd like to say again, thank you very much. And there's my contact details. And it's been a pleasure to share this with you all. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alys.